Good afternoon, everyone. The video shown in this press conference is graphic and viewer discretion is advised.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bethany Harrison. I'm the Commonwealth Attorney for the City of Lynchburg. I've asked you to come here today as a follow-up to a written report that I've already issued regarding a use of deadly force from February 2nd of 2023 off of 17th Street here in the City of Lynchburg involving Raheem Brown and Officer John Person. And first I want to say, and I've expressed this personally to Raheem Brown's mother, that we are very sorry about the loss of her son. This is an incident, a tragedy that we never want to see happen. A citizen of our community is gone. However, the circumstances in this case and applying the law, watching the body-worn camera footage and the number of other reports that I've considered in this case, we've ultimately made a determination that Officer Person's use of deadly force was justifiable self-defense. For those who are watching this press conference via live streaming, who may not have had the opportunity to read the full report that I issued, we will also make it available on my office's, the Lynchburg Office of the Commonwealth Attorney's Facebook page. I imagine a number of news media outlets will make it available to you online as well. But I feel I need to give you some context before I play this body-worn camera footage. As you already heard, when we are at the relevant portions of the body-worn camera footage, it is graphic, it is disturbing, it will be shocking, and viewer discretion is advised. So to give some background information here about what led up to this incident. On February 2nd of 2023, Officer John Person was driving his Lynchburg Police Department issued vehicle that was marked as a Lynchburg Police Department vehicle, driving it in the Kemper and 12th Street area of the City of Lynchburg in the 9 p.m. hour. He was on 12th Street approaching Kemper Street, the light at Kemper Street, when he received information over the radio about a shooting that had just been reported around the 700 block of Grady Street in the City of Lynchburg. From Officer Person's location to the 700 block of Grady Street, the distance is 0.8 mile, or about a 3-minute drive if someone's driving the speed limit. The information that Officer Person had before him at that time is that there were multiple calls for shots fired from 700 Grady Street, and that a white sedan, possibly a Hyundai, Elantra, or Sonata, was involved. Given Officer Person's location, he was in a radius from the shooting area that would have been a reasonable distance to be on the lookout for such a vehicle. As the officer approached the traffic light from 12th Street and Kemper Street, he saw go through the intersection a white sedan. He immediately recognized this sedan because 3 weeks before he had attempted a traffic stop of this same sedan. It was a white Chevy Malibu, and he was not given any kind of year as far as a description of the vehicle. At the time when he saw the white Chevy Malibu, he recognized it as a vehicle that was known to be driven by Raheem Brown. On January 11th of 2023, Officer Person attempted a traffic stop of this vehicle with another officer. Raheem Brown fled the vehicle. They did not apprehend him at that time. There was a search of the vehicle and bullets were found inside the vehicle. Raheem Brown was a convicted felon. He is prohibited from possessing firearms, much less ammunition for a firearm. So Officer Person had knowledge of Raheem Brown, of the type of vehicle he drove, as well as that Raheem Brown did not have a driver's license, that his driving privileges had been revoked. So based on this, seeing the vehicle had temporary North Carolina tags on it, which is a distinguishing factor from other vehicles. The vehicle also had some front paneling of the vehicle that did not match the rest of the vehicle. It was a silver in color, whereas the rest of the vehicle was white, also a distinguishing factor about this vehicle. And the vehicle on February 2nd, 2023 had altered tags. The tags had been altered for the expiration date, to extend the expiration date for the tags. Driving around with altered or forged tags is a Class 1 misdemeanor that allows an officer to pull someone over and charge someone with that crime. Driving on a revoked or suspended license is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Officers are allowed to pull someone over and charge someone with that crime. So regardless of the shots fired call, the officer had probable cause to stop this vehicle. But in addition to that probable cause, the officer also had reasonable suspicion to stop this vehicle and investigate further to see if Raheem Brown was involved in the shots fired call from 700 Grady Street. These events occurred fairly quickly. So as the officer saw the vehicle drive through the intersection, he turned on his lights on his vehicle, his emergency lights. And as soon as those lights are turned on, his dash camera and his body-worn camera is then activated to go back and you might think of permanently record the prior 30 seconds up to that point. This is a system that's constantly recording, and when either emergency lights or sirens are triggered, if there, I think, is a taser deployment is another triggering event, or if the officer just taps the button on the camera to turn on the permanent recording, it goes back 30 seconds and keeps that visual footage. There is no audio. So when I play the body-worn camera footage from the dash cam and from the body-worn camera, there will be 30 seconds of silence, but with visual only, and that is why. That is programmed into this. The officer has no control over that. So as the officer initiated his lights, turned left onto Kemper Street, the Chevy Malibu immediately got into the turn lane to turn left onto 13th Street. The vehicle turned left onto 13th Street. The officer activated his siren. The vehicle did stop at the first stop sign there at Buchanan, and then went straight through the intersection and did not abide by the officers then signaling with lights and sirens to stop. The vehicle continued, turned right onto Pierce, did not stop at the stop sign on Pierce. Continued a little ways down Pierce Street before pulling over. The officer pulled his vehicle over and began to get out of his driver's side. No one ever got out of the Chevy Malibu at that time. Instead, the Chevy Malibu then took off, continued down Pierce Street. The officer got back into his car, continued down Pierce Street. The Chevy Malibu and Raheem Brown continued through a stop sign, did not stop at the next stop sign, continued on down Pierce Street until Pierce Street narrowed. Another vehicle was in front of Raheem Brown, so he could not get around that vehicle and instead jumped out of his vehicle, stopped the car, left the driver's door open, left the car on, got out and ran. In the body-worn camera footage, we can see that Officer Person got out of his vehicle, immediately gave chase. Officer Person was wearing his Lynchburg Police Department issued uniform, displaying his badge of authority, and immediately started calling out, "Raheem, stop, 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 stop." There was a foot chase during this, and you'll see in the body-worn camera footage that as the officer is chasing Raheem Brown, that he is calling in the events as they are occurring, his location, and he's calling into Lynchburg Emergency Communications over his radio. His radio is right above or around his body-worn camera, so you'll see his hand over his body-worn camera as he's running. But he then removes it at another point when he loses sight of Raheem Brown. He calls in that he's lost sight of Raheem Brown. He calls in his location, but then catches sight of Raheem Brown again. And this time, Raheem Brown is now on or heading towards 17th Street. The officer continues to chase him. Raheem Brown slips and falls as he is turning from 17th Street right behind 1700 Fillmore Street and into an alleyway behind that home. It appears that Raheem Brown slipped and fell. The officer is calling out to him continually, "Raheem, stop, stop." As the officer is able to now close the distance on Raheem, the officer again tells him to stop, essentially to stay in place. He then tells him, "Raheem, stop, you're going to get tased." The officer during this does have his gun out, his Lynchburg Police Department issued gun, and there's a reason for that. When officers, they go through their training, and this is consistent with the training that Officer Person had at the Central Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy for a high-risk traffic stop. There are a number of factors that go into that, including if the officer knows the person he's stopping is known to be armed and dangerous, if the person he's stopping is suspected to have been involved in a crime involving a weapon, such as a firearm, then the officer is trained to display his firearm in the apprehension of that person until they're either placed in detention or arrested. So you'll see the officer, he's the only one out there during the entirety of this. He does have his firearm out. When he approaches Raheem, tells him to stop, Raheem is attempting to get up off the ground. You see Raheem's back and rear end kind of comes up off the ground, and the officer then pushes Raheem down to get him to stay in place, which the officer is allowed to do to arrest Raheem Brown. He has information about these Class 1 misdemeanors. As Raheem Brown was going through this neighborhood and driving through stop signs, driving around other cars, he then had probable cause to arrest him for felony eluding. He had probable cause to arrest him for misdemeanor eluding, for the running on foot. It's a separate charge. As the officer was telling him to stop, pushed him down to try to maintain control of the scene and control of this person who had fled on a previous occasion and was fleeing now, it is important to recognize the officer had some particular knowledge about Raheem Brown. He knew him to be someone who carried firearms. He knew that he just got out of prison for a felony offense of malicious wounding. He knew Raheem Brown to be associated with a criminal street gang here in the city of Lynchburg. When he approached Raheem Brown had a red bandana hanging out of his right rear pants pocket, which was consistent with the information that we have about his criminal street gang association. It is a way to show that you're representing your gang. And as the officer pushed Raheem Brown down, the officer then was to the left of Raheem Brown when the officer notices that Raheem has a firearm in his right hand. It's a semi-automatic handgun. The officer then tells him to stop and drop the gun. Over the next 2 seconds, the following events occurred. That's how quickly this happened. Raheem did not stop, drop the gun. He did not abide by any of the law enforcement officer's commands. Instead, he continued to stand up. The officer then takes several steps back, creating a distance between him and Raheem Brown. Raheem continues to get up and then turns to his right. The gun's in his right hand. It is at that time that the officer begins shooting at him. When we asked, Officer Person indicated that when he saw the gun, the first thought in his mind was that Raheem Brown might shoot him. When Raheem continued to disobey the law enforcement officer's commands, continued to stand up, continued to keep the firearm in his right hand, the officer believed that he was spinning around to engage the officer in gunfire, that he was going to shoot the officer. The officer felt that his life was in danger and began shooting at him. So when you see the body-worn camera footage, you will see the first shots go into Raheem Brown's back as he's turning around. The first 2 shots go into his back, and then he begins to fall, and as he falls, he then now turns to his left. The officer continues to shoot as he's falling and on the ground, and you'll see there's 2 shots. There will sound a pause, and then 4 more shots. The officer's asked about this, why was there a pause? And to his memory, this event occurring under high stress and occurring within 2 seconds, there was no pause. He was just firing consistent with his training, and his thought was to stop the threat to his life. His training from the Central Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy, he is instructed that if you've made the determination to use deadly force, that you are not to fire a warning shot. You do not shoot to maim or wound. You shoot to stop the threat. His firearms training with the Central Virginia Criminal Justice Training Academy showed that there were training exercises where he would fire in 6 rounds at a time. His firearm held more than 6 rounds, so he did not empty his entire clip or anything of that nature. This was 6 rounds at this one time, then he stopped. The officer then immediately called in shots fired to Lynchburg Emergency Communications. Raheem Brown was now on the ground on his back. The officer from that position, you'll see from the body-worn camera footage, you can't see from that position the firearm because, again, still the right side is away from the officer. The officer calls in, shots fired, calls in for a medic code 3, or is an emergency, we need you to get here quickly. The officer then stays away from Raheem Brown, who is still continuing to move his arms up and down. His left arm goes up completely over around his head area and back down, and his arms continue to move up and down. Only once a second officer is there on the scene does Officer Person now have cover and can come toward Raheem Brown on the ground, and he sees the handgun that is now lying next to Raheem Brown's right side. Officer Person picks the gun up and throws it away from him to be out of arm's reach. The firearm that was recovered from Raheem Brown was the model was a Glock 22 .40 caliber firearm. It had 19 rounds of ammunition in the extended clip magazine of the firearm and 1 round in the chamber, which means that he did not have to pull back the slide to be ready to fire. The gun was ready to fire. The gun was sent to the Department of Forensic Science. It was an operable firearm. It worked. They could test fire it. So with that information in mind, I'm going to play first the dash cam footage from Officer Person's vehicle. Once the vehicles stop, there's no more action really around the vehicles pertinent to this determination. So I'll stop that, and then I will play his body-worn camera footage. I will pause at the time before we get to the shooting, so that for anyone who's live streaming, if you've determined that this is not something that you want to display to the public, that you have that time to turn off the live stream if that is your decision. Okay.
It's going to be North Carolina, temp tag 289. I can't see it, but it's the same vehicle Raheem Brown drives. Traffic's 30 miles an hour, traffic's like. Copies. He just stopped. Might have thrown something out the passenger window, not sure. Continuing down Pierce Street. Pierce and 16th. He's running. Raheem, stop! 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 Stop!
Responding to that, Callahan. Check that area for that car.
133 Lincoln. I think I have a vehicle. It's a white sedan. It's going to be Raheem Brown. It's going to be on 13th and Kemper, and the vehicle does appear to be eluding.
That work. 130 copy.
13th and Buchanan. continuing through Buchanan, heading back down towards Pierce. Turning right onto Pierce at 13th. It's going to be North Carolina temp tag 289. I can't see it, but it's the same vehicle Raheem Brown drives. Traffic's 30 miles an hour, traffic's light. He just stopped. Might have thrown something out the passenger window, not sure. Continuing down Pierce Street. Pierce and 16th. He's running. Raheem, stop! 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 Raheem's running up 14th. Raheem, stop! Stop! Go Fillmore, Fillmore. Going up Fillmore. Lost him back here at Fillmore. We need a perimeter set. He's running up towards 17th. Fillmore and it'd be Pierce. We need to get a perimeter set. Here, stop! Stop! All right, I got him again. He's running 17th. 17th and Fillmore. Running up 17th. Raheem, stop! Stop right now! Stop right now! Stop! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! You're gonna get tape!
The next events occur very quickly, so if you do not want to live stream the actual shooting of this, of Raheem Brown, then this would be the time to, I guess, turn off the live feed or turn away. I also do want to make the point that because this happens very quickly, I also have some PowerPoint slides of breaking down still shots, and this is, you know, less than a second apart, some of the still shots, so I'm going to show that as well in addition to this. I'm going to go back because the audio, there was a delay there, because there is audio for this.
Raheem, stop! Stop right now! Stop right now! Stop! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! You're gonna get tased! Stay on it! Stop! Drop the gun! Shots fired, Lincoln! Shots fired! Shots fired! Shots fired! Raheem, do not move! Do not move! 17th and Fillmore. Shots fired. Medics code 3. Right here! Right here! Right here! He's got a gun, he's got a gun! Watch the gun! 17th, Fillmore. I got it right here.
Roll him over. Put him in handcuffs. Put him in handcuffs.
17th and Fillmore. We need medics code 3. One male hit multiple times. No. No.
They said a man in a brown sweater. Are you sure?
If there was someone ducked in the car, I wouldn't have known. There could have been someone ducked in the car.
All right, let's start.
Hey, let's
Calm down. Sorry.
Hey, you're good. Take him, put him in the car, and take him to the West
It's
Building.
there.
Come with me.
Okay, take him to the West.
It's right there.
Come with me. Person, come with me. I got you.
At that point, Officer Person is taken away from the scene and ultimately taken to the West Building. Virginia State Police were called in to begin the investigation regarding this use of deadly force. I do have some still shots to show you from this on this PowerPoint. So here you can see this is at 9:28 and 36 seconds p.m. And this is what's difficult to see because of the very fast nature of what's going on in the video. The Byron camera is helpful to capture these things. We all know as human beings what you perceive in your eyes may be different than what a camera captures. You know, our eyes are used to moving around as our bodies move around, but the camera's moving around and we're trying to capture what's being seen. So maybe what Officer Person's seeing and perceiving in all those moments, we be able to capture some of that here with the body camera. So here you see Raheem Brown on the ground. You see the firearm in his right hand with the red bandana around it's an extended magazine hanging down with the red bandana wrapped around it. So that's, you see around the 36-second mark. We get to the next second of 37 seconds. You still see the gun, still within 37-second mark. And the officer is here, telling him stop, to drop the gun. But you see the officer now pulling his gun up to point it toward Raheem. This is a poorly lit, dark alleyway, so you can kind of see the conditions that we're dealing with. And here you can see Raheem is continuing to stand up. On the bottom here, you can see his leg right here, his head at the top, as continuing to stand. Still in the 37-second mark. At 38 seconds, he's still standing up. 38 seconds, standing up. And then here, also within the same second, still standing up, and you can see in his right hand, still grasping the firearm. I have to point out, during the course of this chase and losing him, there were opportunities to throw the firearm away. And that is a factor for the officer to take in consideration. This person is not abiding by any of my commands. The officer is not abiding by any of my commands, that the person is continuing to hang on to this firearm and seems to be that he's not going to give it up. Also at this point, given that he was a convicted violent felon, there was also another offense here, which is that he was a violent felon in possession of a firearm, which carries with it a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence that the officer also had ability to arrest him for at this time. Right after this is when the officer begins firing, and he continues to stand up. As you saw from the footage, he is shot twice in his back and then kind of rolls over to the left and is shot 4 more times in the left side. And consulting with the medical examiner determined that there were 4 projectiles found in the body, 6 projectile paths. Those 4 projectiles found in the body would have all been potentially fatal. So the 2 shots to the back and then 2 to the side. The other 2 were to the arm and hand. We do not have any other eyewitnesses to this event, at least no one that has come forward. On scene, Virginia State Police collected 6 spent casings that all had head stamps that were the same make, that were consistent with from Officer Person's firearm. The Glock 22 semi-automatic firearm is here. That you see, this is the gun that Raheem Brown had. It is being traced to determine, and we're continuing the investigation to determine how he came into possession of this gun. In determining whether there should be criminal charges or whether the officer acted within justifiable self-defense, the standard is the same for a civilian and for an officer as far as what we are to consider. And the court tells us that the use of deadly force is an act of necessity, and the necessity must be shown to exist, or there must be shown reasonable apprehension of imminent danger by some overt act as to amount to the creation of necessity. The right to kill in self-defense begins when the necessity begins and ends when the necessity ends. Imminent danger is defined as an immediate and perceived threat to one's safety or the safety of others. The same case that holds that went on to say that it is not essential that the danger should in fact exist if it reasonably appears to the one claiming self-defense that the danger exists. He has the right to defend himself against it to the same extent and upon the same rules as would pertain in case the danger is real. A person claiming self-defense may always act upon reasonable appearance of danger, and whether the danger is reasonably apparent is always to be determined from the point of view of the one claiming self-defense at the time that he acted. So we do have to look at this from an objective standard of what an objectively reasonable officer would have done or perceived in these circumstances. and then also determine whether that person reasonably perceived a threat to his life or a threat to the life of others. And here, this officer had actual knowledge that Brown was associated with a criminal street gang. He was known to carry firearms. He had just been released from prison on a charge of malicious wounding, refused to obey officers' commands to stop and submit to lawful authority on a prior and recent occasion in addition to this occasion. Officer Person had probable cause to believe Brown committed misdemeanor and felony offenses in that officer's presence. The officer had reasonable suspicion to investigate him as a suspect in the shots fired call from Grady Street. Officer Person discovered Brown had a firearm when the officer was right next to Brown, where the officer immediately backed away and commanded Brown to stop and drop the gun. Brown did not stop or drop the gun, but instead stood up from the ground and began to turn to his right, which is the same side where he's holding the gun. So in this 2-second time span, this officer had to make a decision about this person who was given commands to, who was not following any commands, who was known to be armed and dangerous, and the officer said he perceived that his life was in danger. And I also find that a reasonable officer in this same situation would have reasonably perceived that his life was in danger, and thus Officer Person's reaction to shoot him was within justifiable self-defense. I also find that this was not excessive use of force. The 6 shots fired at Brown's torso are consistent with the training the officer received to shoot at center mass and shoot until the threat is stopped. You may have experienced this in your own life when someone is under a great deal of a stressful situation that, while you're perceiving an event and your body's reaction are 2 different things and can take a bit of time to react. If you've come upon a sudden stop in traffic, the time that you see it happening until your body's able to react and stop. It's the same thing here. So here the officer is acting consistent with his training and shooting in a series of 6 shots. And while it is certainly, for us, the untrained person watching this, it is shocking seeing him shoot this person as the person is turning around and continuing to fall to the ground. There is that delay from the time someone is perceiving the threat until they're able to react either in affirmative action or to stop their current action under such a period of stress. And I also understand that there may be a thought or concern, well, what if Raheem Brown was just trying to run away? And looking at this body camera footage and determining whether the officer acted as a reasonable officer would act in those circumstances, all I can factually say is that Raheem Brown was continuing to stand up and turn around. Even if someone finds, no, I think he was trying to run away, the self-defense analysis is the same, and this comes from a United States Supreme Court case of Tennessee v. Garner from 1985 that says where the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a threat of serious physical harm, either to the officer or to others, it is not constitutionally unreasonable to prevent escape by using deadly force. Thus, if the suspect threatens the officer with a weapon or there is probable cause to believe that he has committed a crime involving the infliction or threatened infliction of serious physical harm, deadly force may be used if necessary to prevent escape, and if, where feasible, some warning has been given. So for all these reasons, no criminal charges will be issued, and I find this to be a justifiable use of self-defense. Those are the comments I have at this time. Our Lynchburg Police Department Chief Ryan Zudema has some comments he would like to make, and then we will open it up for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harrison. First, I'd like to thank the Virginia State Police for investigating this. This is something that, for my tenure as police chief and before that, anytime we have an officer-involved shooting, we will ask for their assistance to investigate it. That's a piece of us being transparent with our community and ensuring that an outside agency that's not directly involved in the incident is the one looking into it to determine if there was any type of criminal activity. So we appreciate their continued support in those type of efforts. I'd also like to thank our Commonwealth attorney for her timely review of this and being able to get it out. It's important, I think, that we get this out to the community as soon as we can. It certainly doesn't mean we cut any corners. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what the Commonwealth's attorney said. She gave a very thorough review of what took place that day. But I do want to start by saying that any loss of life is tragic. We certainly offer our condolences and have to Raheem's family and friends. We understand Raheem's death not just impacts the family, but it also impacts our community, which is part of the reason why we're here today. Our thoughts and prayers are also with Officer Person and our LPD family. No officer ever comes to work wanting to use deadly force. Our officers have an extremely difficult job, and I would argue to you over the last few years that job has gotten even more difficult. They're required to make split-second decisions, as you clearly saw demonstrated in this incident. And Officer Person's actions were in direct response to the actions of Raheem Brown. So you understand, anytime we have an incident like this where force is used and it's deadly force, there are two separate investigations that take place. One is the investigation that Mrs. Harrison just spoke about, conducted by the Virginia State Police. That's a criminal investigation to determine if there's any criminal actions on behalf of the officer. The other investigation is a standard investigation that we do at the police department, an internal investigation that looks to determine if the officer's actions were in compliance with all of our policies. That internal investigation is still ongoing at this time. And at this time, I'll turn it back over to Mrs. Harrison. We can answer any questions you may have.
I do want to let you know that we met with Raheem Brown's mother, and she had a family member with her and an attorney with her when we played the body camera footage and answered questions that she had. And understandably so, she was extremely upset. And it was actually her thought, her feeling that she did not want this played for you because she felt this was an invasion of her family's privacy. But for transparency's sake, we play the footage for you today. So does anyone have any questions?
Mrs. Harrison, was Raheem's mother in agreement? Did she have any concluding remarks about what you presented to her?
We told her that we determined this to be justifiable self-defense, and she did not have any remarks directly related to that. I mean, she had comments about things that she saw. She was very upset. This is extremely upsetting video to have to watch for any person, much less for someone to watch happen to her own son. So she had questions, she had some comments about different things, but it wasn't anything about what did not express to me specifically disagreeing with the final outcome of the she may. I don't know. She didn't specifically say.
With an investigation ongoing still, what's the status of the officer right now?
I'll let the chief of police discuss that. The piece that's ongoing for us is determining how Raheem Brown came into possession of this firearm.
So Officer Person right now, and has been since this incident took place, is in what we call a restricted duty non-enforcement assignment. So he is working in the police department, does not have any enforcement action, will not be involved in any of that. He will remain that way until we get to a point in the investigation we feel that he's good to come back, as well as he feels like he's okay to come back.
Has he been involved in any other incidents where he's discharged his weapon or in another officer-involved shooting?
He has not been involved in any other incidents where he's discharged his weapon.
Chief, how long has he been with the force?
So he got hired in, let me make sure I give you the right date, June of 18, understanding it's about a 6-month police academy and then some training. So he actually went out on the road roughly in early 19, so about 4 years on the street.
We talked about the bandana being possibly gang affiliated. I mean, do we know for sure that he was in a gang? And if so, is there something that the police department is doing to combat gang violence like this?
Yeah, we are constantly, so to answer your first question, absolutely, he was identified as a criminal gang member here in the city. That's evidenced through many years of documents that we have with him, certainly represented by both the red, what we would call a flag sometimes, in his right pocket, which is indicative of the side that folks involved in the gang he was in carry, as well as a red bandana wrapped around the firearm. What are we doing to combat that? We are continually working to try and address guns, gangs, and drugs in our community. Any type of violent crime, that's something we've had a partnership with Virginia State Police since early December. They come in and assist us in the city with additional resources and manpower. Obviously, our staffing is challenged. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it isn't. So it's good to have them here and helping us out with that. That's a partnership we continue to work on, and we're trying to make sure that we are focusing on our efforts on repeat offenders. There is unfortunately a very small number of individuals in our community that are responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime, and when it refers to violent crime, a lot of times that is related to or in association with gang activity.
Had the officer had any other encounters with Brown specifically? How closely did he know of Brown?
Yes, I think if you've heard Mrs. Harrison speak, there was an incident, and I don't have the date in front of me, about roughly a month or so prior to that. 3 weeks prior, where he had attempted to stop him, and I think the same vehicle. He ran on foot. They didn't catch him, but he was well aware of Mr. Brown as well as his criminal behavior prior to that incident.
Chief, could you talk a little bit more about Raheem being shot in the back? A lot of people in the community had that concern about being shot in the back.
Yeah, I think for starters, I want to say there's a common misnomer that when someone is shot in the back, that it's automatically something that's wrong. I think you've heard Mrs. Harrison explain that in good detail on how that happened and why that happened. We have to understand the dynamics of human interaction and high-stress incidents, right? And there's an action and a reaction, okay? The reaction takes much longer than the action takes every single time. So there's really 4 components to that. If we break it down, there has to be some type of perception of what's going on. In this case, Officer Person sees a firearm, and he recognizes that it is in the hand of Raheem Brown, and it is capable of causing him significant injury or death. The second part is he's got to analyze and evaluate what is going on. You see that in the video. You see the officer immediately start giving commands to drop the gun. You see the officer start to retreat back away from him to create distance, but he is in very close proximity, and there's nothing around that would provide what we call cover. Cover is something that would stop a bullet if it was shot at the officer, meaning a tree, a car, something that would stop a bullet from striking the officer. And he also recognizes through that evaluation process that Brown's actions are putting his own life, Officer Person's life, in jeopardy. Once he gets through that second stage, the third stage is he's got to formulate a plan. What am I going to do about what I just assessed? In this case, his plan was he was going to discharge his firearm. He then has to take that action and physically do that. And as I think Ms. Harrison provided a good example, you're driving down the road and the light's green, and as you're approaching the light, it turns yellow. You've got to make a decision, do I hit the gas and keep going to get through it? Do I hit the brake and slow down and stop? That doesn't happen instantaneously, right? So as the officer is going through that process to make that decision to fire that weapon, that's at the same time he's starting to turn, is my assessment of that video. And then obviously, as Mrs. Harrison also said very accurately, the same amount of time and the same process, that 4-step process you have to go through to stop taking an action you're doing, right? No different than stopping a car when you're going down the road. So, based on the evidence that I've seen so far, I've not seen the full state police investigation. I obviously became aware of the findings this morning, as most of you did, because we are intentionally not involved in that investigation. I understand the community's general concern when they say that. I just ask that they understand what I just explained.
Is Officer Person a white man?
I'm sorry?
Is Officer Person Caucasian?
He is.
Chief, can you walk us through, a lot of wonder has been about the 6 shots that were fired in that standard practice for training. Can you explain that to us, why it's 6 shots, and kind of go over that?
So I think you're filling a little blanks in. I'm not giving you a hard time, but it's not necessarily, when Mrs. Harrison says it's standard to shoot, one of the courses that they fire of many courses is to shoot 6 rounds in a short period of time, okay? The officers are trained to do exactly what she said. They are trained to address a threat and continue to address a deadly threat with deadly force until that threat no longer exists. So that literally, as she said, there are 6 rounds that are fired in about 2 seconds, okay? And in the process of all that taking place, the officer's making the decision to shoot. That clock starts, and then he's processing what he is seeing as he is shooting, and then he's making a decision to stop shooting, and all that occurs in 2 seconds. And that is a split second, especially in a high-stress situation. That goes very, very quickly.
How many officer-involved shootings has the Lynchburg Police Department had? And do you consider that to be, I can't recall when the last one was, but do you know the total number?
You have a time frame?
I guess in the past 5 years or so? I don't know.
I'd have to look to give you definitively. We had a window between early December and this shooting where we had 3 officer-involved shootings in that window. That is very unusual. I would call that atypical for our department. I can tell you that in my first 20 years here in the department, we had about 3 officer-involved shootings in 20 years. Since then, we've had an increased number of them, but I don't have the exact number. I'd have to get that to you.
Chief, when I was out there that night, even after the shooting, the officers remained in that alley searching. Could you talk a little bit about what they were continuing to search for?
Yeah, anytime we have a situation like that, an officer-involved shooting or any other type of scene where, there's evidence potentially there of any type of crime, they're going to search that alleyway to make sure there wasn't anything else. As you can see in the video, Officer Person is catching up to him as he kind of turns into that alley. There's not saying he may have thrown something else down. There may have been something else there. So we just want to make sure we canvass that area initially to identify things in that situation. The firearm, for example, our officers just stand by with that until the state police were able to get there and allow their crime scene folks to process that scene.
Chief, I have to ask, it's been a week since the 12-year-old girl was shot and killed and still no charges. Can you talk about that? Are there charges pending, and why the delay?
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak about an open investigation and what goes into that. I'm not going to jeopardize potential charges that may be coming. That is something we're continuing to work on. We're continuing to follow up on several leads, and something we continue to consult with Commonwealth Attorney's Office on.
Chief, I have to ask, it's been a week since the 12-year-old girl was shot and killed and still no charges. Can you talk about that? Are there charges pending, and why the delay?
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak about an open investigation and what goes into that. I'm not going to jeopardize potential charges that may be coming. That is something we're continuing to work on. We're continuing to follow up on several leads, and something we continue to consult with Commonwealth Attorney's Office on.
mentioned it was fairly uncommon, recent increase in officer-involved shootings during the December to February timeframe. Since then, have there been any plans to initiate more training or any changes in training following those couple months?
Yeah, so anytime we have any type of use of force, as I said, we review all uses of force, whether it's a firearm discharge, a taser discharge, or anything in between. So we always evaluate those. That goes through the entire chain of command for review. It also goes to our community policing advisory group. They review all those as well with them. So those are constantly being reviewed every time. So it's not, we don't just wait till we have an officer-involved shooting to do that.
It's now, I guess, 2 minutes till 2 o'clock. I know the chief of police has another meeting at 2. I'm happy to field one more question. If there is another one for me.
Could someone speak about the importance of simply complying? A lot of us are tired of these situations. Talk about the importance of just complying with the officer so we won't be here.
Well, Andre, I think you bring up a great point. Now, I can't say what was going through Raheem Brown's mind or some of our other folks who are involved in these situations that's going through their mind. You have some people who they may know they're facing a hefty prison sentence because, you know, they're in possession of a firearm by a violent felon. And it may just be an immediate reaction of, I don't want to go back to prison for an extended period of time again, and I'll do whatever I can to get away. But it is critical for everyone's safety. If you're pulled over by a police officer, it's just a traffic ticket. It's just a speeding. So just put your hands where everybody can see them. Be cordial, be polite, professional. It may be upsetting and make someone very nervous. That's understandably so. I think our officers understand that. They want to go home in one piece and be safe, and no one wants this. This is not an outcome that anyone wants for any case. No matter who it is, I don't care their background, I don't care what's going on in their life, no one wants this. So it is much better for everyone to walk away safely than to have outcomes like these.
Can you talk about the weight that you considered that he might have just been turning around? I mean, that seems like it's maybe pivotal in your investigation. How much weight did that carry for you?
Well, it's a factor, certainly, to be considered. But in what the case law tells me in making a determination about self-defense, I have to view it from the lens of a reasonable officer in those same circumstances. But also I try to take a look at it and think, what were my first impressions? What would be the average person's first impressions looking at this? So they can answer some of those questions. But for that officer in that moment, if someone is standing up, disobeying commands, has been doing so the entire time, known to be armed and dangerous, and they stand up and start turning around, that's all I can factually state, is that he's turning around. If anything, he was running one direction, he'd been turning around to go the other direction. That's possible. But I can only state what we factually know what was going on and what we could see from the body-worn camera footage.
Do we have any idea what is causing this uptick in these officer-involved shootings over the last couple of months? I know you mentioned there's been 3 in your first 20 years on the force. Yeah. Why 3 in the last couple of months? Any idea if there's gang changes that are causing these or something like that might be causing it?
I would say real quick, I think I have some personal opinions about that. I think people we've seen come out of the pandemic and out of a lot of the calls for social justice, and you just have different things going on, I think, almost coalescing. I don't have any data for that. That's just my personal opinion. I think all the stresses from the pandemic and from the murder of George Floyd, a number of different things. There's a lot of stress on people, and we're seeing more cases of mental illness going on, of people reacting, just reacting instead of thinking. A number of issues like that. I do think there is overall been cultivated a culture of disrespect and of any authority figure. Teachers, adults, anyone, much less police officers. And I think we're seeing that being borne out in what's going on our streets.
Last question.
And I'm just going to answer that, and then we're going to step out. I won't disagree with anything the Commonwealth Attorney said. I will also tell you that we collectively are 2 parts of the criminal justice system, okay? And a lot of times, very bluntly, we take it on the chin for the whole system, okay? There's a whole community that needs to come around this, all right? A violence problem in our community is not just a police problem. It's not just a Commonwealth Attorney problem. This is a community problem that needs to be addressed and solved by our community collectively. I'm going to meet when I leave here with some community members to talk about things like that, okay? And the other piece to that is we got to keep some of these violent felons in jail, okay? We have, over and over again, we see folks who have long histories who are out on the street committing more crimes and victimizing more people, okay? We do everything we can to arrest them and provide a case that Mrs. Harrison can successfully prosecute and put in jail, but there are other components of the criminal justice system that neither she nor I control. So I'll leave it at that. I thank you for your time. I hope you all have a good day.